Welcome back to Take a Leap and Transform, a Neurodiversity journey. I'm your host, Joseph K. Muscat. Are you ready to take a leap with me? Today, I'm excited to share with you a different kind of workplace, one to be honest, not even I have thought of before in this light, and how we can make it more inclusive for neurodivergent talent. What workplace is that, you ask? Well, that's the athletic world. To assist me in this endeavor, I'm pleased to be joined by Nathan Sherratt. Nathan is an active football referee with an official field story, which I used, or should I say, he used to inspire and improve the lives of referees of all ages and levels. Managing director of third teams, where he supports referees by making them aware about all things related to resilience and mental toughness to enhance their performance and improve their mental health. In addition, he works with schools, colleges, universities, and in industry communicating similar messages, as well as delivering mental health and neurodivergent training. Welcome, Nathan. It's so nice to have you.
Thanks very much for having me, Joseph. It's a real pleasure to join you today.
Well, Nathan, let's start off. I always like to start off with you telling us about your neurodivergent journey. So, when were you officially identified as being autistic?
To be honest, I think I was probably 13, 14, 15 years of age. And really the milestone in my life that, reminds me of this is that when I was in secondary school, high school, I did my exams as I was finishing, as I was leaving in the last couple of years of being in that school. And I knew that I was really struggling with my coordination, with my, never being able to handwrite, really struggling with sequencing thoughts and things like that. And I found school to be very challenging. So my mother was is a very, very bright and switched on person. And she knew that I needed to get some help so that I could have extra time in exams and have the opportunity that I deserved. And, as I'm sure we'll go on to talk about when we talk about the, exams and things like that. It was a very difficult time, very challenging time for me, because I found exams very difficult, due to my autism. But certainly in terms of getting me some help, such as extra time for examinations and things, that was kind of the means to the end when it came to me getting a diagnosis. For me, a diagnosis was very much a means to an end. But even though it happened and it helped me to get the time, that was the only purpose that it served, really, until I was 21 years of age. And when I got to that age, I was thinking about starting my own business, which I have done now, the third team, as you mentioned in the introduction there. And just before I did that, I actually took some time to understand what autism meant for me, the impact that it had in my life up to that point, the way that it impacts my life on a daily basis now as an autistic adult. And for me, it was a real revelatory journey, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, because I would like to think that if people can think about behind their televisions, a lot of wires get tangled. For me, it was like untangling wires. Things made sense. Things were clearer. I understood a lot about why certain things had happened in my life and why I'd experienced the world in the way I had through my developmental years. So for me, it was a very, very, enlightening experience when I was 21. So I sort of have two discoveries of autism, really. The official diagnosis when I was in my mid-teens, and then my real diagnosis, if you like, which is when I came to understood what it meant for me, what autism was in general. Because at the time I got the initial real diagnosis, it was like saying, oh, well, the sky's blue, the grass is green, water's wet. It didn't mean anything to me. But then in my early 20s, I took that time to discover what it actually really meant for me.
Well, that's really interesting perspective that you've given there, because it gives, two understandings, right? There's the official diagnosis of, you are, or you have an RX. And I don't think when the initial diagnosis happens, one, I don't think it's properly explained to individuals. And two, I don't think that people actually delve into really understanding that. And then it also depends on the age of maturity as well. Being diagnosed at 15 versus 21, that definitely plays into a factor. So it's interesting to see from the later on in life, you've actually took a pause in life to really explore and understand what that means, which isn't really surprising because when we actually take a look at that, and again, I use myself as a comparison, is that I was diagnosed at a very young age. It wasn't properly explained to me. Later on in life, I got a re-diagnosis to get a better clarification. Was explained, but didn't really sink in. It wasn't until like 20, 30 years later where I finally said, okay, I really need to understand this to figure out what is going on in regards to what this really means to me. So that, again, that gives a very interesting perspective that you've painted there and what you've discovered. And in that, when you actually look at that comparison from being diagnosed at 15 and taking a pause in life at 21 to really delve deep, what were some of the things that you saw that explained particular things, as well as leading into that clarity that you started to have when you did that exploration?
I went to Disneyland in Paris when I was probably 8, 9, 10 years of age. I was still in primary school, or elementary school, and I remember distinctly, even to this day, that there was buses that would take us from the main park to the hotel where we were staying, and these buses, I don't know whether it's indicative of French public transport or what, but these buses were never on time. And I was hysterical, with anxiety, tears, stress, don't know what to do with myself because these buses weren't running to time. And I'd been told this is when the bus is coming, and I couldn't deal with that. And, I never thought deeply when I was that young about why I was the way I was and why nobody else got hysterical about things like that. But when I was going through that journey that I described before about, when I was 21 years of age and unraveling the wires and things, for me, that came up massively there, because that came a lot and spoke a lot to my insecurities that autism has given me, because, I'm looking at things that should be rules-based. So the bus time should run to time. It should be rules-based. And I hadn't had the opportunity in my life at that stage to kind of, how do we say, make myself aware that the world doesn't work as it should, which I think sometimes you can be in very much tunnel vision when you're on the spectrum like that. So I think that, I don't know whether that answers your question, Joseph, but it's certainly an example of something that, I remember when I was 21 and I was sort of going back through the early stages of my life of being a very, very anxious child, incredibly. So, to actually have that is something that really, it made a lot of sense to me as to why I was the way I was. And even now as an adult, I drive a car, I've got a driving license. Every day I pretty much drive, and I still feel very, very uneasy about being in a traffic jam. It causes me not to be hysterical like it maybe would have when I was a child, but even now I feel I would rather take a journey which was 10 miles longer than sit in a queue of traffic. And I know that is something that is really down to my, neurodiversity and, being an autistic person. I know that for sure.
Well, yeah, that completely is understandable. And yes, you have answered the question, because it gives it gives that perspective in regards to, not understanding your autistic traits when you were younger and your way of thinking, and how, as you put it, how the real world does not in line with how your thinking is. And then as you got older and you're looking back, you're understanding, okay, this is why it was, and this is how this is the kind of structure that I need to be able to have to be able to think and perform, which makes complete sense. So one of the things in regards to autistics, and not just autistics, but as well as those with ADHD, is having sensory issues. So can you explain to me and to the audience, from your perspective, the difficulties and challenges you have in regards to sensory issues?
Very much so. And I think one of them is, for context here, for the listeners, I live in the northeast of England, and I don't know what the perception of the northeast of England is, wherever you are listening. But what I can tell you is that when it's winter time, it's very dark and it's very cold. And one of my big challenges around, the sensory aspect of my autism is the fact that, I really struggle with the cold. I also have Raynaud's, which is a problem with the blood circulation, and it means that my fingers freeze up. And, as you alluded to in the introduction, Joseph, I'm a football referee, so I spend a lot of time outside all year round, and in particular in winter. So that does me no good, and I find it actually incredibly painful. Because I have an oversensitive level of experiencing pain because of the cold. It's actually an odd thing, because pain which is external, so for example, stubbing your toe off a table or something, doesn't seem to affect me as much as pain that is internal. So the cold, and then the closing of the blood vessels, and the pain that then comes with the fingers and things. I find that really, really difficult. One of the things that I also find really difficult, and I think a lot of people who are not even maybe autistic find this, but it's exacerbated, I think, by my autism, is talk about winter again, is the lack of sunlight that we have, in this part of the world. Now, the funny thing is, and I didn't mention this to you before we started recording, Joseph, but I was at St James's Park in Newcastle at the weekend, and there was an event that was sponsored by Visit Malta, which is obviously where I'm sure the listeners know you live, Joseph. And on the sign it said, Malta, over 300 sunny days per year. And I was thinking, I've got to get myself down there and live there, but it actually highlights to me the fact that I'm very much conscious of it all the time now, is how much having that lack of light, and it's called SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and I think that it's massively exacerbated within me because of my autism, and the fact that I'm more alert in terms of sensory of light, and that makes me a little bit more anxious, I think, as well, around wintertime, a little bit lower in mood. All of those things are affected by that. The other thing as well is that I feel the cold. I've actually got to tell you, we're recording it on a day where it's 25 degrees where I am, and I'm not warm. So a lot of people would go, oh, I've got to take my top off, it's that warm in 25 degrees, but I'm finding it cool, not the best. So I think I do have a very, very different internal thermometer, if you want to call it that, for temperatures and things, and it does take to be very warm before I'll basically wear short sleeves and things like that. I'm also massively affected by light. I don't like any heavy lights. If you go into a room and have a main light on, I'm not, cold and warm light is something that I've become more aware of. And if you have a lamp, for example, they tend to emit warmer light than a main room light. So I'm much more comfortable with lamps than main room lights. I find it very, very difficult from a sensory perspective. Sometimes when I'm in a busy place and somebody's trying to talk to me, because I'm tuning into conversations left, right, and centre constantly, and I find it difficult. So sometimes I'll say, do you want to just step into this side room, and then I can give my full focus and attention to somebody and what they're actually saying to me without being overstimulated by what's going on around me. So I'm quite affected by those things a lot, and certainly overstimulated a lot. But I actually feel that potentially I'm not as actually stimulated in a sensory way as much as a lot of other people on the spectrum, and it is exactly that, Joseph. It's a spectrum, so there'll be people less affected and more affected than I am, but I feel that I'm probably slightly luckier, because I know how difficult some of the barriers are for me with a cold, but things could be a lot more difficult for me in my life, and it might be a lot more difficult for me to function on a daily basis. I'm sure we'll come on to it. I'm a trustee of an autism charity, and one of our beneficiaries only eats 4 things. One of them is chicken nuggets. The other one is burgers. The other one is potato waffles. And the other one is, which I find slightly odd, given that the other two are in one family group and the other one is a chalk ice. So that's cold and could potentially have other things. But it's very, very interesting that a lot of these things are not particularly spicy, not particularly, broad. But I have a more broad palate. So I see a lot of the comparisons between others on the spectrum and myself as well.
It gives a really interesting picture in regards to the internal. We know that for those who have sensory issues, in comparison to someone who's neurotypical, a neurotypical could be, on a scale of out of 10 could be on a scale of 1 to 4, right? Where someone on the autistic and ADHD spectrum is on a 8 to 9, if not 10, in regards to their sensory level. And that's one of the hard things for neurotypicals to understand, in particular in educational environments and workplace environments, how light, sound, smells, the color of the paint can actually have a great impact. So with that in mind, what would you say then when you look back and currently, what are some of your particular strengths that you find that autism gives you?
I think I've always had a very good photographic almost memory, very, very good at, and that helps me a lot when I'm on the football pitch as a referee, because I need to think about where was his foot at the point of contact. Is this a yellow card or a red card? All of those things are useful skills to have. I've got a very, very good memory and a very, very good understanding of, laws of the game in football and of also people, times, events, games I've refereed, places I've been, all of those things, which it's a great, thing to have, but equally sometimes not the best. If you've gone to that ground and never refereed well or something like that, you think, well, I remember those 2 poor performances or performances where we couldn't, make the teams happy. They're at the forefront of your mind. So I think that's a good thing. I think really a lot in my everyday life as well. I know my girlfriend is absolutely useless at remembering directions and things when we have to go somewhere. And I find it frustrating sometimes that she we go somewhere 5, 6, 7 times and she still can't remember it. But then I realize actually that's my autism that allows me to remember that, that you've got to turn left there, right there, go over the roundabout there. Those are the things that I remember, probably because of my autism, and it's a positive for me. And yet it's not something I should be expecting of her, neurotypical person. What I also think a lot though about is actually something that's kind of a positive for me, but not really a trait of autism, is the fact that whilst I have autistic traits, I am in a lucky position as a high functioning person who's able to be a business owner, is able to be a football referee, is able to, maintain a reasonably happy life, reasonably normal, functional life, what people would consider. And there are many, many, probably millions of autistic people who are in the same position. But what I feel is a real strength of myself is that I am able to use that to help other people who are on the spectrum who maybe don't have the ability to advocate for themselves. So, I'm a trustee of an autism charity, and I'm able to advocate for our beneficiaries at board level, decision-making level within the charity, as the first ever person on the spectrum to be a trustee of that charity, which is a wonderful thing for me. I also coach a lot of neurodivergent people, and with different forms of neurodivergence, and I'm able to help them, and I'm able to help them from a perspective that a neurotypical coach can't, because I'm, even things that are not autism, there are some themes and threads that run through neurodiversity that, have similarities, and I'm able to empathize with and understand. So I see that as a strength for me, and I see that as a positive, because I've got those experiences and I'm able to use them to a positive, to help other people, to advocate for people, to support them in business, to support them in life, to coach them, mentor them. I see those as real strengths and real positives that have come from myself being on the spectrum.
Fantastic. And yes, we'll get into the charity aspect as well. But in regards to memory, it's interesting how many have difficulty with working memory, yet they have a very good, strong visual memory. And in particular, autistics tend to have almost an photographic memory. So it's really interesting that juxtaposition when you make that comparison. And it's definitely an added strength to what you do. Now, during our prep talk, we had explored your previous work experiences, and we talked about some of the challenges that you had faced in the workplace. And when we actually go back and kind of relate to what we talked about earlier in regards to the need for structure as well as sensory issues and your strength of memory, this all relates, should I say, into your work experience. So can you describe to us what were those challenges that you found in the workplace where it just wasn't a right fit for you?
You're very much right there, Joseph. I left university and I didn't know really what I wanted to do. And I had the opportunity to go and work with a company, and it was a very, very macho culture within the organization. And I'd never been in a workplace before. And really, if you know, for the listeners, if you conjure up in your mind your stereotypical opinion or image of what an office and a workspace is like, it was pretty much that. It was a modern office, open plan, computers everywhere, different departments, desks, you know, like a kitchen area, everything you'd expect. And I walked through the door and I immediately thought, I don't know how to behave in this environment. And it's not because I'm some sort of, you know, ruffian who doesn't know what's what. It was because I'd never been in a workplace before. I hadn't been prepared for it. I didn't know what the appropriate language was. I didn't know what the way that we communicate, a lot of the way that you make things happen to succeed in a workplace. I was at a total loss. And what immediately became very clear was that I was quite different to a lot of the other people in that workplace. And I found it very, very difficult because I was trying to do the best job I could and trying to get the support that I needed from other people. But actually, I was finding it quite difficult to communicate with them. And I found it really difficult because I think that it was a very, I knew I needed some help and some support, and I needed to do things in a certain way. And that was probably a bit of a tunnel vision thing to do with the autism. And that meant that I was communicating overly directly. And I couldn't understand some of the bureaucracy in the workplace, some of the workplace politics that happens. I was almost above it all, really, because I was very much a linear thinker. You know, I see this problem, I see the solution, I don't see the bureaucracy in the middle of it. And I think that meant that basically I worked there for 7 weeks before I came to the decision that my position was untenable, because I could feel hostility towards me. I could feel people thinking, this guy's not doing a good job. He's very, very direct. I find him quite difficult, find him quite intimidating. And I was basically forced to resign. And that was the point at which I then invested a lot of time into understanding my autism. That was just when I was 21, as we said earlier. But, you know, for me, I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about now, and one of the things that I deliver a lot of workshops on and support on, is how to make the best of being in the workplace and be able to be a neurodiverse person in the workplace who succeeds, unlike me, who, you know, I think I failed because I wanted to be successful more than anything, and I wasn't, and I ended up walking away. What I actually realize now is that because I've got my own business and I'm much more fulfilled than I ever think I could have been if I'd not had those problems. I'm actually succeeded, but it feels like a failure at the time. You know, your first ever job and you're walking away after 7 weeks, you think, it's not great. I think a lot now about the work that I do with neurodivergent people and with employers to help them have success with neurodivergent individuals in their workforce. You know, so I think that really a lot of that training that I deliver now has been informed by my own experience, but is also informed by the fact that I've got a much greater appreciation and understanding of a broad range of neurodiverse individuals, and that's kind of informed the way that I've moved forward. But certainly those were a lot of my challenges when I actually had my turn in the workplace, and I have to tell you, Joseph, I'm a lot happier now I'm not in it.
I'm sure you are. It's really interesting that the dynamics of a workplace, there's a lot of facets that a lot of people don't realize that need to be managed in the workplace. And people is one of the major facets, and how to negotiate and interact and engage with people. And in your circumstances, one we're seeing, I'm reminded of Andrew Marsh, who was one of a guest of mine on the podcast, and a good acquaintance as well. And he describes, somewhat similar in regards to his line of thinking. He sees the problem, he sees the solution, and goes directly towards it. Where everybody else, they don't see the solution immediately, and then there's this whole inner dynamic that's going on of not there's inner politics, let's say, in the words you're going on, and the engagement of people where they're not able to achieve at that same level. It's also interesting in the aspect they knew that you're coming straight out of college, university, so this is a first workplace, and there was no mentoring, no coaching to provide the support that you need, to recognize the aspect that here's a young man who's fresh out of uni, and we need to guide him and mentor him properly, onboard him, so that one, we get our return on investment, and two, we're able to retain such good talent. And it's also interesting the aspect that because of the politics was so, what's the word I'm looking for? So troublesome, let's say, or not even troublesome, so required a certain skill of engagement that they couldn't see how you were able to see the problem and get to the solution. Because at the end of the day, it's about the results you're able to produce, not about the inner skill of workplace politics.
I think workplace politics, Joseph, is what holds people up. I've long said that if a neurodivergent cabinet ran a government in a country, that would be the most efficient thing ever. And yes, okay, mistakes would happen because sometimes you jump to the solution and potentially don't, maybe sometimes. And I'm guilty of it, so I'm speaking from my own experience. You sometimes jump to the conclusion, you maybe don't think about some of the impacts or problems that it might kick up. But I do genuinely believe, Joseph, that, if we had an autistic prime minister and an autistic cabinet with him, that they would make some considerably good decisions without wasting a lot of time. If you think in the UK, a parliament is 5 years. I think an autistic government could achieve twice as much as a neurotypical government, because they would just not think about doing something for 3 months and then decide not to do it. They would just do a load of things. Some of them would work, some of them wouldn't, but I think we'd be overall much further forward.
There's an interesting experiment which I read out of the book The Power of Difference by Simon Fanshawe. It was a Stanford University study, and it's called the Pac-Man experiment. And the whole point of the experiment was in regards to how diverse thinking and a team of diverse thinkers and how they perform versus neurotypicals. So they had a game of, I believe it was a physical game of Pac-Man, in which they had to physically act out. And you had Group A and Group B. Group A was made up of your homogeneous neurotypicals. Group B was made up of a mixture of neurotypicals and diverse thinkers, basically neurodivergents. The Group B greatly outperformed Group A. Group B did spend some time talking about it, but then immediately took action. Those are the neurodivergents. Group A spent more time talking about what they were going to do rather than taking action. And the analogy that was brought out of the book as well is that if you actually think about Group A, those are your typical standard, boring, useless meetings that you go through every day in the workplace where there's a lot of talking and no action. So obviously the conclusion is that you need to have more diverse thinkers within an organization to be able to act and get things done. And which relates completely to what you're talking about in regards to the government. For sure, you would need to have a balanced approach in that sense, in that you will have to have an outsider's perspective to guide and say, have you considered the particular impacts to a community or society before you take action? And then that will have to be considered to help improve the action taken and also prevent potential backlash. But yes, it would be very interesting to see how a diverse team of thinkers run a government versus our traditional old school approach. So after this experience, you've decided to start your own business. And of course, this also happened after your exploration of understanding yourself. So what were some of the lessons that you learned and the adjustments that you had to make to become a successful entrepreneur in running your business?
I think that one of the things that I've done is I've actually been able to understand my own limitations. And that's been one of my successes, I think, is knowing what I'm good at, what I'm capable of doing, what my strengths are. And I'm lucky that I get some help with some of the things that I'm not so strong on, such as sequencing and things like that. You know, when I have a lot of clients that want to work with me, sometimes I need some help and support as to how do I best support them? How do I decide what the priorities are in terms of getting back to people, doing these things that really help me? And one of the things that, and I actually think it's probably the opposite of what you'd expect from maybe somebody who was stereotypically autistic, would be I actually really struggle with numbers, not in the sense of dyscalculia or anything like that. I'm just not very good at anything to do with numbers. So I always struggle to collate my receipts correctly, business receipts. I'm okay now that I've learned the process of organizing invoices, but I have had to get into a position where I'm very much in a place, I suppose the best way I can say is I've had to get myself into a place where I've got a lot of routines for every aspect and every department of my business. So routines for sending out invoices, routines for, I write a blog every week, you know, I've written a blog every week for 4 years now. And I have a process when I write that blog. I do the initial draft on LinkedIn. I then put the content into WordPress and I go through a structured organization of formatting it within WordPress. And then I add the buttons and the words and the signatures and the links to previous blogs that I've written. And I have a full structured process that I go through. And we're recording this on a Thursday and I write the blog on a Friday and it goes out on a Friday. So tomorrow I will be going through this process that I do every week, ordered sequence. So I have learned a lot of processes, and I've probably learned a lot of processes that I do without thinking. Again, thinking about driving a car, I probably do the same thing every time I drive a car, you know, in terms of where I look, put the seatbelt on, type in where I'm going, whatever. Those are all things that I do on a regimented, rigid basis. And I think that basically the way that I've managed my being, reasonably successful, but I've still got a lot of ambition to be even more successful in business, is by learning a series of sequences and orders in which to do things so that I can be as effective as I can possibly be without getting overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's really interesting you said that, because I found for myself as well through the coaching and mentoring and awareness that I bring up in regards to neurodiversity is that neurodivergence needs structure. And even more importantly, many neurodivergents need to learn, which they haven't been taught from the experience that I've had. They haven't been taught how to create structure for themselves. And I think that's one of the major issues that a lot of neurodivergents have, is that they're trying to do a lot of things and trying in particular figure out and understand their neurodiversity, but they haven't learned how to create the structure that they need to be able to do that, to improve their either life or performance in their jobs or careers or businesses. So I think structure is really, really important. And once again, the most important thing is being able to teach them how to create that structure. Now, you mentioned having support, because this is really interesting because a lot of successful neurodivergent entrepreneurs focus on their strengths and then build a support structure around them for the areas, as you mentioned, where they have challenges. Now, you mentioned you have challenges with sequencing. So what other types of support have you put in place to support those areas that you have challenges?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm very conscious of, very aware of, is the fact that, you know, if you're on the autistic spectrum, you know, by and large, if you think of a pint glass half filled with water, that is a neurotypical person's capacity for anxiety. So they have half full and they've got, so your resting anxiety level when things are going okay is about half full. But an autistic person's capacity is 3/4 full. So immediately you can see capacity to take on additional anxiety, such as, you know, your car needs a new wing mirror, or, you know, you've run out of bread, or those things that can add stress to a busy daily life. The capacity to take on those stresses in life is significantly less when you are certainly autistic. I would think it's also massively impacted on other forms of neurodivergence as well. And so one of the things that I'm very big on for that reason, and I'm very much aware of it, is I have a weekly meeting with somebody who helps me with my well-being. And that's, again, a routine thing for me, because having the opportunity to, and I do it at the beginning of a business day, having that opportunity at the beginning of a business day in the middle of the week, to just offload, to you know, put those challenges in my personal and professional life that have made me feel a certain way, or just to be able to talk about them, provides me with a form of catharsis that makes my life a lot easier, helps me to live with a lot more sound mind. It keeps me on an even keel, you know. So that is certainly something that I'm aware of, and something that I do in order to keep myself in a good, you know, mental space, and I don't, and to hopefully keep at bay overwhelm and some of the other challenges that mean I can't perform and be as productive as I know I can be when I'm at my best.
That's really amazing, and that's a really fantastic suggestion that you've provided in regards to what you do, because you're right. And anxiety on a greater scale, a lot of people don't realize, whether they're neurodivergent or not, how much anxiety actually impacts a neurodivergent's life, and the level of anxiety that a neurodivergent actually has, and being able to knowing how to manage that anxiety. And for those from the outside looking in, they need to understand that aspect of what is actually happening, that neurodivergents are having a huger anxiety than the average person, as well as knowing how to help that individual manage their anxiety. So that is a huge crucial aspect that you've provided for yourself and shared with us, and how one should support themselves. So now let's really get into it. Let's take a pause here, because I want to share with you not one, but 2 workshops I've put together to bring awareness and to uplevel the skills of employers, managers, and human resources. The first workshop aids in building a more inclusive environment in the workplace for neurodivergent talent, and in developing the skills of management to be more engaging with their teams. I geared the second workshop towards examining and providing practical solutions and how to be more inclusive to neurodivergent talent in the recruitment process. Reach out to me on my website to learn more about these amazing programs. Let's get into the sports, because this is a huge, really, really interesting facet. And there are really a lot of questions I have into understanding the athletic world as a workplace and how it impacts neurodivergents who work in that workplace. So let's start off with what may be seen as surprise by many is how many neurodivergents are in the athletic world?
Well, I think, Joseph, not enough is the answer to the question. But to expand on that and to speak more of it, I think there's a massive issue. I was lucky enough to speak at a inclusion summit called Include Summit in Manchester in May of this year, and I was part of a panel for the first part of my involvement in that summit, with an Olympic rower who was autistic, and she recounted tales of how difficult she found the structure of being in training camps to be an Olympic rower and to get into the very top of her sport. She found it incredibly difficult with the way that people wouldn't necessarily deliver on the schedule. So she needed that training schedule to be able to row at her best. And sometimes people would change the schedule at the last minute, or the venue would be changed. And she found these challenges. But what she also said that she found was that the association, a British association, I believe it was, didn't always support really to the best of their ability her in her endeavors, because they didn't make the accommodations that she needed in order to be able to actually get some kind of rhythm and momentum in order to deliver the best that she could on the water, I suppose, or in the boat, however you want to call it that. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be done and a lot of awareness that needs to be given. But I think that predominantly you need to do it with the coaches. The coaches need to be aware. Everybody needs to be aware. But what I will say is there are a lot more. It's exactly the same as people who are homosexual. It's very much the same as, the things that are non-visible. Okay, there are more people who are homosexual. There are more people who are neurodivergent, but we don't know about them because they feel reluctant to share that information for fear of discrimination, being treated differently, being viewed as somebody who can't be trusted in a dressing room. And these things are terrible, negative things that we just know will do us damage. We need to celebrate neurodivergent athletes, and we need to give them the support that they need to flourish, because everybody talks about I think a lot of people who maybe don't know enough always talks about autistic people having superpowers, and I would say they don't always get the opportunity to get those superpowers to flourish because people use it as a tool or a stick to beat them with when it ultimately comes to it. My experience of being a young man in a playground is autism was used as a stick to beat people with a real negative. You'll be tarred with a negative brush. So we need to change the perceptions, increase the understanding. If we increase the understanding, okay, because a lot of people, if I tell, there's a lot of people I could tell them I'm autistic and they would be absolutely baffled because they'd think, why am I able to speak? Why do I never go into it? You'll laugh at this, Joseph. I was 24 years old the first time I went into a sensory room. People think that to be autistic is to spend your entire life in a sensory room, not able to speak or live a normal life. And, that stuff could not be further from the truth. So I think a lot of it is about changing perceptions.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first off, you're right. Not enough are in the sports world, or not enough are open about their neurodivergency in the sports world. I think, at the latter end of it, we're looking at the aspect of because of the early 80s and 90s and the lack of awareness and understanding in regards to autism and other types of neurodivergency, there has been this generational idea of what an autistic person is, or someone who has dyslexia or so forth. And we're, I always say that we're now, hopefully we're now in this, because of COVID, as much as it's been a headache, it's also been a blessing in some areas. Because of COVID, we're now potentially in an area of hopefully a long term, not a short term, of enlightenment, because we're starting to see a lot more awareness in regards to neurodiversity and neurodivergence in the workplace, and in every aspect of the environment, where we're seeing a lot more advocacy happening. Now, in regards to awareness, when we take a look, you're in the sports world, you're refereeing, you're interacting with athletes, you're interacting with organizations. You've kind of painted a picture already.
Yeah.
But what level would you say currently, or previously to now? Because again, we're in that the potential age of enlightenment. What level of awareness is there in these organizations when it comes to understanding neurodiversity?
Well, I think to just to add to what you've just said, to be honest, Joseph, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel that what didn't help um, the, the sort of global perception, and I mean global perception when I say this, of autism in particular, was Rain Man. I think that was a very, very unhelpful film, really, for trying to help people to understand neurodiversity, because it didn't. It painted autistic people as all the same. And the facts are very simple. When you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, you know? Everyone is different. So I think there's a lot of challenges that we have to look at. But, you know, going back to the question that you asked me there, I think that within sport, as I've said, I feel that it's not enough to actually just talk about it and say it. I think that actually there needs to be more people who are involved in sport, like myself, who are actually able to be examples of what you can do, and how it, being neurodiversity, doesn't limit you, and isn't a limitation thing. It just shows that we can do things, we can be at the same level as neurodivergent colleagues. And there are always going to be things that we're going to struggle with slightly more, and completely comfortable with that. The reality is we need to be in a position where we're exactly the same in terms of the way we're viewed. Okay, he has autism, but it doesn't mean that he can never, ever, ever, achieve a promotion and become a professional referee. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't have that ambition. So I really want to kind of, when I meet people in business, when I meet people in football, when I'm refereeing, I want them to see me as an autistic person, to see what I look like, to see that I can do 99.9% of the things that a neurotypical colleague can do. And I want them to go, actually, yes, okay, he has autism and some things he struggles with, but in reality, he's no different to the referee we had last week or the one we had the week before. And that's where I want to kind of get to. But the reality is, I can't speak openly about it in certain quarters, because the perception, the stereotype, means it'll be used as a stick to beat me with, used as an insult, something to try and get at you with. And it's sad, but that's the reality of, I think, where we're at right now. And unfortunately, the only thing that we can do is to continue to try and get as many people with as much neurodivergence as possible into the mainstream, so that people can see them, they're visible. Because if you can't see it, then you can't be it. Because we need young people who are, I was working with a client last week who was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 7, and told that things were always going to be difficult for her and always going to be challenging. But what we need is for that 7-year-old in 2023 who's just got their diagnosis to be able to see somebody at the elite level of sport, in the Premier League, playing football, in the Rugby World Cup, in the NFL, in the NBA, wherever it might be. We need those people to be there to show the youngsters that have just got their diagnosis that their life is not going to be limited and tainted by being neurodivergent.
100% agree. And once again, there's just a lot there to unpack. Let's go back let's first go back to the roar. You gave in your life a clear indication about the need for structure. We now have a roar who's autistic, who's showing the same traits of needing for structure. And the workplace is, in this particular case, the athletic workplace is not understanding and how to provide that structure where there is a rhythm, in particular in regards training schedule, to be able to function in a very appropriate level where they can perform at the level that they want to perform, as well as the level they are expected to perform. And it's really interesting in the aspect, this is the second time you've mentioned it. I didn't say anything the first time, where you've expressed a degree of trauma that you have experienced in your life as well as in your career. And in what you've expressed, you're rightly so very protective in the sense that you don't want to have that trauma repeated. And it's really sad to see how in your world, in your workplace, that you are facing these, well, let's be honest, this discriminatory behavior, which you're protected of to prevent trauma, which is having an impact or can potentially have an impact on your career, on where you want to go with your career. And if this is having an impact on you as a referee in the sports world, what impact is that having on a professional warrior, a professional football player, a professional neurodivergent coach, or a professional basketball player, or so forth? This lack of awareness and stigma can really be damaging to one's ability to perform in their job, in this case, their athletic ability, as well as damaging to their athletic career.
I think, we have to look and we have to try and put a positive spin on it, because to talk about what, you're absolutely right, to talk about the trauma and to use words like damaging, is that going to attract people to want to play sports and to want to commit? Because let's make no mistake about it, okay? I spend a lot of time out the house on a weekend and on a midweek evening out refereeing, driving to games on a Tuesday night, long journeys, Saturday afternoons. It's a commitment in time, time away from my family, time away from friends. If you're a young kid just starting out being trying to be a professional footballer in an academy, you're missing out on playing out with your friends after school in the streets, going over, you miss some parties, when you come into your teenage years. You have to really be dedicated, principled, diligent as a professional to make it and to be successful. So if you're neurodivergent and you know that you're going to have to make those sacrifices, but somebody might think less of you because they find out you've got autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADHD, whatever it may be, is that worth it? Is that something that you want to go through? I think not. And that's why I think we need it to be an inclusive environment, not the other way around. And it's something we've wrestled with for a very, very long time. And I think that a lot of things have happened recently in the world, populism, polarization, post-truth, US, Russia, UK, there's countries all over, can't get away from it. You can't turn on your television without seeing populist rhetoric being shoved down your throat. We have fought incredibly hard to create more inclusive environments, but what we are now finding is more and more division in society, and that can only be a negative thing in our battle to have neurodiverse and neurodivergent people included more in mainstream society. So there's a lot of challenges, and I know that we started the question with doom and gloom, and I feel like I'm spreading more doom and gloom, but the reality is we need to be aware of what's going on. It's a difficult time, but we need to constantly fight against that and be more inclusive and more open and want to work with people rather than being isolationist, we've got to try to open up doors, include more people, create more welcoming environments for not just neurodivergence, but, you know, like I talked about, sexuality, all sorts of race, everything. Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into this, but I feel really, really strongly, as I'm sure you can tell, about how difficult it actually is for people, and whether they want to put themselves through that is, you know, there's a lot of good people missing out because the thought of going through that is, you know, too painful for them.
Absolutely. It's not doom and gloom. I mean, the reality is that the athletic world is a workplace, and we know that in the workplace there are particular challenges, and we know that the workplace is all based on function. To improve function, we have to recognize and understand that we need to take care of the needs, and organizations need to understand that so they can get the performance that they want to have to improve that function. And for that to happen, yes, it's about inclusion. And as much as it's about inclusion, it's about understanding and how to be inclusive.
It's
It's
about
about,
believing, Joseph. I will, sorry to cut
yeah, yeah,
across
of
you.
course.
I really feel that it's about believing it. It's about having people driving that inclusion at the top who mean it, who feel it, not people who are looking to tick a box and say, yeah, we've done that. We've included neurodivergence. We've included, you know, sexuality. We've included race. We want people who are not looking to tick boxes. We want people who are passionate and who believe in it to drive it forward. And that's my big thing.
I completely agree, Nathan. I absolutely completely agree. And this is where, you know, when the people at top, as well as the people in the middle, you know, they need to believe it and they need to breathe it. They need to breathe it within themselves and within their organizations and the people around them to have that inclusivity, to understand that once you have that inclusivity, you take care of the needs, then you're going to improve performance, and it's going to create a better employee experience. And in this case, it's going to create a better athletic experience for that athletic talent. And when we, because you brought up, you know, I want to say this because you brought up the aspect of that young girl, you know, she's being told negative stigmas that is really setting a picture in her young mind of what her life's going to be. And it's completely false. You know, why do we always, when it comes to neurodiversity and neurodivergence, is that we're always focused on the negative aspect rather than focusing on the positive aspect and explaining to that young child that under these conditions, you're going to flourish. And yes, we need to have those role models, which then brings up the really interesting question, because we have seen in the last 2-3 years a lot of top athletes coming out in various aspects of the athletic world, coming out with being diagnosed and saying, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic. And yes, not enough of them are coming out. Those who are coming out, one, what is the impact you feel that they are making? And two, what do you wish they were doing more of?
I think that, you know, the impact that they're making is very, very clear. I said it before, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So being visible, showing their success, showing that what they are, what it's possible for somebody to do who is autistic or has ADHD or dyslexia or whatever it might be, showing that there's a possibility there, showing what can be achieved. I think that's it. I think, what are they not doing that they could be doing more of? Well, I think what they could be doing more of, absolutely, is getting in amongst the charities and the organisations that are working every single day to support families, to support individuals, to support everyone, really, and in every area, though they exist. So it's there. You know, what they can be doing is joining with these people to show them the way, to show them, because I believe that to reach the top level, you have to forge a path. Okay. So I actually think that learning from those people who were able to reach the top, and I'm going to say it, in spite of being neurodivergent and not being able to get any support or being able to really talk about it. How did they do that? What were they able to do? How can they recount their experiences, share their experiences, develop their experiences, which can then help the next person with the same talent, but maybe who's not as savvy and maybe doesn't have as much nous to get through a lot of the barriers. You know, that's what I think they can be doing, is sharing their journey of how do you circumvent that problem and overcome this challenge in order to get to the top. Because there's no doubt a lot of talented individuals missing out of their chance of being successful through one, I would call, innocuous reason or another innocuous reason that's not really a genuine bona fide factor in actually stopping them reaching the top. It's just a societal pressure or whatever it might be that actually needs to be cut out and needs to be gotten rid of, because there is a way to overcome it, and those messages of how to overcome it needs to be shared.
You must have been reading my material because we're completely in line, because I completely agree with 100% everything you've said there. You know, one, there's the aspect of, we see a lot of top executives, and in this case, top athletes, come out and say, you know, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD. And the argument has always been, that's been put out there, which is, why is it now you're coming out? Why didn't you come out earlier in your career? You know, it's great that you've now achieved this high level where, well, frankly, let's be honest, you're pretty much untouchable now, you know, because you're at that level. You've reached the CEO level, the director level. You've reached, you know, the top of your athletic ability in your team, that you can come out. But what about all the other people, as you've mentioned, who are unable to come out and to get the support and the acknowledgement and the recognition that they need for their strengths and challenges? And again, you're reading my mind, you've been reading my material. I don't know what else to say, because we're completely in line. Is why, you know, now that you've come out, why haven't you now come down to the people who, if we were thinking in the aspect of a boardroom or a company, you're the CEO, you've come out and said that you're dyslexic, autistic. Why are you not coming down to the trenches of your employees and saying, okay, what do you need? You know, if you're autistic, if you're,
it's like sitting in a tree house.
Yeah,
you can extend an olive branch down and help those people, but instead you're looking from your view on high without any link back down. And the thing is, I don't know how you feel, but the way I feel is I don't even mind if they get to an untouchable level and then come out, as long as they are extending an olive branch down. If you're a CEO of, you know, for example, in the city of London, you know, the financial district, if you're a CEO of an organization, the financial district, and you are neurodiverse and you come out and you talk about it, then let's do something about it. Let's create a scheme for apprentices who are neurodivergent, who want to have the career that you've had. You know, if you're in a sports club, let's create, you know, whatever it might be, create something that leaves a genuine legacy, so that when you're gone and retired and living in Barbados and gone, because you're a billionaire, there are people working in your industry that are there because you created a legacy for them. You created an initiative and a scheme for them. That's my belief.
I completely agree. You know, we can understand why they haven't come out, because there's that fear, that stigma. But once they have, you know, where is that olive branch, as you said, and where is that program that they're creating within their organization, within the athletic world, their place of work that they've been passionate about for many years and decades? What are they doing within that athletic world to help other athletes, as you put it, whether it's a program or a project or what have you, to be able to support them to get to a similar level? And that is, again, we're completely aligned. That is a problem that you and I both see and agree on and want more of to happen. Now, I think part of the equation to this are the coaches. When we look at business, we see managers, in particular line managers. Managers and line managers, they're the ones who set the culture within their organization. And in particular, frontline managers, because they're the ones who are at the front line of delegating and managing these various diverse teams. So it is the managers who need to have this awareness and this training to better support their teams. So from what I'm seeing as an observer on the outside, who's not in the business of sports, I'm seeing the coaches as being those managers. And correct me if I'm wrong in that aspect.
I think you're absolutely right, Joseph. I think you're absolutely right.
So in that aspect, then, with you being in that world, what do coaches need to know? What awareness and skill levels do they need to know to be able to support their neurodivergent athletes?
They need to know about the impacts and the implications. And it really, again, I'm cutting through the bureaucracy here, really. I think it's as simple as that. They need to have a broad awareness. You're never going to know because, like I said, when you've met one, and I'm going to extend it to neurodivergent. When you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person, okay? So you're never going to know every single possible permutation, implication of their individual form of neurodiversity. However, I think if it's not a problem. The amount of training that's available in every part of every country in the world, give or take, now that in terms of neurodiversity training that you can access, even if it's not great training, some training is better than no training and complete ignorance. To get that built into, for example, a coaching qualification. So you talk about coaching licenses in football, for example. If getting training on neurodiversity was part of a coaching license so that you can say, this is how you can coach neurodivergent individuals, then that would help. They might not know the far end of it, but they don't need to. If they get a broad appreciation, that means that they've got the versatility within their coaching to be able to cater for having a mixture of neurotypical and neurodivergent people amongst the group of people that they're coaching or managing, then that's going to immediately create a much more inclusive culture that they've got within their team. But it's going to make everybody feel that they want to run through brick walls for the manager or the coach. It's going to make them feel empowered, that they want to do their best. And it's also going to allow them to perform to their fullest potential. So that's really my big feeling on it. I can't really say too much more than that, because I do think that even such a small change as that would make the world of difference.
Once again, I completely agree. And we're in line in regards to that thinking, because when I talk about managers, it's really interesting that coaches have to get a certification. When we take a look at managers in a place of work, there isn't no required skill sets to become a manager, as if you would have in regards to that you are trying to employ an accountant or an administrator. They need to have particular skill sets and experience to be able to fill that role. When we look at management, there is no whether or not they have those particular skill sets, because we don't treat management like a proper job. We don't treat it as a proper career path that they need to have those particular skill sets and particular people skills and how to manage and coach and engage with their employees. And part of that is there's obviously no lack of skill set or requirements in or training in how to manage diverse people, because they're going to be definitely managing diverse people. And then you add neurodiversity on top of that. So it's really interesting. For a coach, you have to have a certification. And that's part of that certification is that they need to have that neurodiversity training to be able to support their coaches. So we're definitely in line in that aspect. Now, and thank you for that very important advice that you have given, especially because you are in that career, that field, and that profession. Now, you mentioned earlier that you were invited to a conference to speak about neurodiversity in the workplace. And this is really interesting. It's interesting because it brings a positive light to what we've discussed, that now all of a sudden in the sports world, they're starting to recognize and have this awareness, even if it's at a introductory level. What do you think has brought on this change?
I think that what I found was that the two guys that created it, one was I have to be clear about this conference. The conference was not just about neurodiversity. It was not just about disability. It was also about race, sex, gender, all of these other aspects of inclusivity. It was a very broad, unbelievable event that I have to give particular plaudits to Jimmy Hooper and Gurmit Singh Pawar, who set the conference up, and would urge anybody to attend the event who's in the UK in May next year. Unbelievable event. And I have to tell you, Joseph, it was one of the safest places I've ever felt as well. The inclusivity, I know it's in the title of the summit, but the inclusivity that actually created there, it was just like constant learning. There was no judgment. It was like you take all the caution, everything you might have to do where you maybe feel you can't 100% be honest about things, all gone out the window. This was absolutely unadulterated learning. It opened my eyes so much. But what I've got to say is this summit that was created here, and the way that I talk about it, I learned so much about it because it was created with the mindset by these two guys. One of them had been a high-level umpire in, I think it was outdoor hockey, which he'd been really quite strong in. But I know he had an involvement in a number of sports. And, for me, he was gay, and the other guy is mixed race. And it's about actually, or he might even be South Asian. I could be getting that wrong. But the point is they come at it from two different points of diversity, but they're deeply passionate about diversity, and they want to create it. And what we found was that high-profile people, Olympians, I was on a panel with an Olympian. I was on a panel with a guy who made a documentary that went out on the BBC. I was also joined by somebody who was working in a regional football association in England, specifically to work with diversity. But that role doesn't exist within every regional football association. So it's in London, which is a very diverse area. So you would say, okay, it's understandable. But I live in the northeast of England, where probably the levels of diversity are lower than London, where there's 7 million people, 10% of the population, whatever you want to call it. And it's disappointing because you meet that person who's a wonderful person, and you think, I want somebody to do your job in my area because I feel there's an inequality that my area doesn't have someone like you. So immediately you see all these things. And what I felt that was the best thing about the whole event was the fact that we were talking about all these different types of diversity, totally open, totally unadulterated, totally without fear of negative perceptions and all of these things that just are really negative in general. And it was just such a wonderful event. I could wax lyrical all evening about it because it was absolutely fantastic. And what we need to see is one of those events taking place in every country in the world. Now, this was all about sport, but this could be in any industry. This could be in finance. This could be in law. This could be in, insurance, whatever it is. You could create this and show this and create this positivity. And what you would do is eradicate almost overnight, I'm convinced of it, a lot of the narrow-mindedness, lazy stereotypes, negative perceptions would be gone, because it was just pure, unadulterated education, eye-opening, learning, changing perceptions. And I just can't speak highly enough of it, Joseph.
Your enthusiasm, is leaking through the microphone and the screen. So, it sounds like a really wonderful event of educating and understanding inclusion overall. And the fact that they recognize neurodiversity as part of that is a really huge stepping stone and milestone of this event. And I'm looking forward to hear how it continues on every year now. And you also hosted a workshop. Can you describe to us what that workshop was about? How receptive was the attendees?
So I mentioned the panel that I was a part of with the rower and the BBC filmmaker and the other people. So that was part of it. So I did that. They dedicated a whole day to neurodiversity, Joseph. So in the morning, I was doing this panel discussion and we had a lot of young people in. But the workshop that I did in the afternoon, that was something that I hosted. And my big thing was actually about workplaces, really. It was about the workplace of sport, but it was actually based upon what I've done in a more broad sense for workplaces in the past. You know, workshops that I've delivered for people who are in, you know, like I say, people who are in finance, people who are in law, people who are in different parts of society. So, but I tailored it to be more for sport. And what I had in the room was I actually had the Olympic rower came to watch my workshop, but also I had, you know, people from the England and Wales Cricket Board. I had people from rugby, England rugby. I had people from, you know, Scotland rugby, all different national governing bodies for different sports. And a lot of the questions that I had at the end of the workshop were around how can we help our coaches to incorporate this in? How would you suggest we do this? So I was given a lot of guidance actually at the end of the Q&A part at the end of that workshop. But the content of the workshop was a little bit about my own background, which obviously I've shared with you in this podcast, but also a little bit about the experiences that I've had showing people what autism really looks like. I used some clips actually from the BBC documentary, which was made by the guy who was on the panel with me that morning. And I also used Rain Man as an example of this is not what all autistic people are. So that's why I brought probably Rain Man up a little bit earlier. That was part of my workshop, and I used the example of the glass, the pint glass with the water, and showed the differences in capacity around anxiety, and also showed, you know, the people what are some of the real themes that come up. So I did some research about themes that come up around autism and neurodiversity that people always bring back up and talk about how we can challenge those things. So really, it was a very broad presentation, helping people get the best out of supporting people who are on the autistic spectrum, who have ADHD, who may be dyslexic. So there was a lot of different bits and pieces in that, although my primary focus was autism because that's my specialism. And I took a lot of questions, and I had a number of letters back afterwards, people writing to me via email saying, you know, we've actually taken some of the things that you mentioned in your workshop and implemented them, and we're having a little bit of success with that. So that was really pleasing to hear as well.
Oh, absolutely. And well done. It's really exciting to hear that you had a room full of particularly governing bodies of different sports organizations within the country who sat there and really listened and understood the aspect that it's the coaches who need to have the awareness. You know, it's these managers, and that they're taking action based on the workshop and the feedback given. So it's really amazing. It's really amazing. And it'd be interesting to see again as the years go by, as this conference continues to bring more awareness and more education in the sports world. And with that said, you've mentioned it before, and I know you're very proud of it. You've mentioned your charity. And one, can you explain the charity to the listeners and what the charity does? And two, it's also interesting in the aspect that you are the first autistic person to sit as and be elected as as one of the board of trustees. And it's really interesting to hear what you've been doing and why you are the first.
So the charity is called Daisy Chain. It's based in a place called Norton, which is in the sort of Tees Valley area of the northeast of England. But the charity's got a reach across the entire region of the northeast of England, and it makes an incredible difference to you know, the lives of, initially in its early years, it made the difference to the lives of a lot of parents, providing respite for lower functioning children who needed real specialist support to allow the parents to have some respite, but also to get the support for the children as, you know, as much as they needed it. And it was set up by a lady called Leslie Hanson and her husband, Dwayne Hanson. and this was 2003. So we've just celebrated 20 years of the charity, and unfortunately, the idea of Leslie, because of their son being severely autistic, Leslie died before the charity could begin, but Dwayne continued to set up the charity in her legacy, and I think that he drove that through with a passion. And he's spoken to me about how much he has to sacrifice personally to actually make sure the charity was conceived and brought into existence and could start to help people. And I think that it's a great legacy for his late wife. And it was a deeply hurtful thing for him, because eventually he ended up stepping away from the charity completely, and it went into the hands of other people who were running it on a day-to-day basis. And what happened was that about probably 4 or 5 years ago, Dwayne was invited to speak at the annual ball for the charity, and the incoming chief executive, who is now the current chief executive, Neeraj Sharma, saw him there and thought, I've got to get this guy back involved. So he came back involved, and he's now our chair of trustees. So he's back involved, and it's a wonderful thing. And, I'm so honored to be able to share that platform with him in terms of being on the board with him. He's such a special person, because the charity basically wouldn't have been dragged into existence without him, and what he sacrificed to make that charity get to 20 years, well, get to 1 year, never mind 20 years where we're at now. But it's, the charity is diversified in respect to the fact that it was an autism charity, and now it's a neurodiversity charity which supports ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and many other forms of neurodivergence. It's also now something that the beneficiaries are not just under 18s, they are autistic adults and people who previously were not able to access support from the charity. So 20 years have passed. We've just launched a new logo to first 20 years of the charity's life had one logo. We've modernized it. We've taken it to the next level. We've opened 2 superstores to get, big charity superstores, but really the way that they're done, Joseph, they're like, the best way I can describe them is they're like IKEA. So, they are not just what you would think of when you consider a charity shop in your mind. They are big retail units with a really diverse range of products, including the charity's own designer label called New Threads. So obviously incorporating the neurodivergence into the fashion label that they've set up. So, for me, I'm so proud. And you're asking me about why am I the first person to be elected to the board as a neurodivergent? Well, I don't know is the answer. I don't actually even think that it was a priority for the charity. When I applied, I made it known that I was neurodivergent, autistic, that I wanted to come and help, and I wanted to advocate at board level for people who are on the spectrum, but also for other neurodivergents as well. And that was something that they were so keen on, they wanted so much. But I think it's really difficult. Things like that can slip from the list of priorities when you're trying to build a charity. And I was immediately so impressed by the chief executive, Neeraj Sharma, when I first met him before I became a trustee. And the work that he does every day, the experiences he's got is invaluable, and there's an amazing team that work under him that have built the charity. The second superstore was only opened this year, so we've made some, and when we had the 20th anniversary ball on the 1st of July this year as well, we made more money than we've ever made before from a charity ball. We are now thriving, and it's because of the work that's been put in. So I'm so proud to be a part of that, and proud to be able to advocate for our beneficiaries at board level. And I'm really, really optimistic about the future. The way that it, excuse me, the way that it works with being a trustee in the UK is you're allowed to serve a term of 9 years. So I've got 8 years left, and I intend to make those 8 years as most impactful as possible to be on the journey, so that when I leave, and Daisy Chain is 29 years old, I can feel that it's a much better place than where I found it, and that I've been a part of that, and that hopefully I've helped a lot of people who are having the challenge that I spoke about earlier on when I talk about my early life. Hopefully that we've created a place, and there's more hubs across the region in which I live, and which I'm incredibly proud to live in, that can access the support from this charity. So that's kind of the way I feel about it, and certainly where I'm at with it right now.
Well, thank you very much for explaining Daisy Chain. It sounds like an amazing charity, and the history, the rich history of it, and the impact of that history sounds absolutely incredible. And the strives that they have made and the impact that it has made in the autistic community is ideal, isn't it? I can feel the pride coming through the mic and through the screen. And thank you for sharing that. So Nathan, let's get down to what you do. Your business, your coaching, your refereeing. Explain to us about your business.
I think my business falls into 3 categories. The first being that I work with umpires, referees, rules officials, whatever you want to call them, from a number of different sports all across the world. I sometimes I joke that I'm in Australia in the morning and America in the evening, and I've passed through Europe in the middle of the day. And that's the nature of the work that I do, working with officials of all different sports and helping them with performance challenges, helping them with psychological challenges, helping them to reach the next level. We helped 26 officials to gain promotion between August 2022 and July 2023. So, when you think about those clients that we helped, we played a part on that journey, or I played a part in the journey, but really they did it themselves because they took on board the coaching and the support we gave them, but they went out on the field and delivered those performances and achieved that success, got those big appointments to key matches, and made success in their career. So that's a big part of what I do there, and I'm really, really proud of that. The other part of it is the neurodivergent side. So I work with a number of different companies that have clients who are neurodivergent, and I support them with a lot of their business challenges, support them with a lot of the challenges around getting focused on what they need to focus on. Hopefully I help them circumvent and navigate some of the pitfalls of early days in business, things that can be distractions that can take your energy away, where help them to redirect that into positive things that are going to make them do what we're all in business to do, which is make money and be successful. And then finally, also the other side of it is the mental health side of it. So delivering work around mental health, helping people improve their mental health, helping people develop their mental health and well-being so that they can perform well in the workplace, and that they can look after the colleagues and be the best people that they can be.
Absolutely fantastic. And what would you say then is, let's say, the top 2 things in regards to the guidance that you give to referees?
I think probably the hashtag which is associated with the social media output of my business is resilient referees. So resilience is a very, very important facet to what I do. I like people to be as resilient as that can possibly help them to be, because we need all to be resilient in every aspect. Whether we like sports, engage in sports, have nothing to do with sports, everybody needs resilience in all walks of life. Again, it sounds like I'm going down the road of doom and gloom, but we're all going to have bad things happen in our lives. Unfortunately, we can't get through a fulfilled and well-lived life without bad things happening, regrettably. So having the resilience to overcome those challenges and to meet them head on and to be able to overcome them and be successful off the back of them is a big part of what I do. So resilience is certainly one of my other tools. I think well-being would be my other side of it, is about how do we look after ourselves? How do we stop ourselves from reaching a point where we're making ourselves unwell, and we're not enjoying our lives anymore, and we're making bad decisions. So I want to try and help people with their overall well-being. For sure, it's something that I try to do, is to help them build in areas where they can use their energies in a positive way, whether it be to go for a walk in the morning on a beach, or if you live near the coast, or if you like to paint a picture, or whatever it is. I'm always encouraging sometimes the clients to engage in those things that allow them to switch off and to be slightly better focused elsewhere with their energy, so that they can be more happier and more fulfilled. So I think they're probably the two main mission goals that I've kind of got to help people live fulfilled and happy lives.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Those are very two key things in coaching and in life, frankly. Resilience and health and well-being. So lastly, Nathan, how can our audience get in touch with you?
So they can visit the13team.co.uk, and on there they'll find out a lot of information about the work that I do with referees, and they can also sign up to the mailing list to receive my weekly blog. We're just celebrated 200 editions, and we are going to be celebrating 4 years in, I think, about 3 weeks' time. We'll be at 4 years exactly since the first blog. So really, really proud of that, and it's something that I always do. And we, have a readership of between 30 and 50,000 every week, which I'm really proud that we've built that, and readers, in every continent of the world. So really, really proud of that. Also would encourage people to follow the Third Team on social media: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And I've had some really, really fantastic feedback and real success on my new Neurodiversity in Sports Shorts series that I've got on YouTube, Third Team YouTube channel. We've had some really, really good views on that, and some really good feedback on that. So I'm really proud of that. So we've got ADHD, autism, and all the different aspects of how neurodiversity links in with officiating, how it can be a haven for officials and things like that. I've spoken about on there. And so, I always love to read some of the feedback that we get and some of the contact that we get through the social channels as well. And of course, on the website, there's a contact page for people to get in touch with me should they wish to.
Fantastic. So Nathan, thank you very much. We have surely covered a lot of ground. And I want to thank you once again for not only sharing your personal journey, but as well your efforts in the business of sports. As always, everyone, I will put Nathan's contact details in the show notes, and I will even put in the contact details of the chair that he's part of, Daisy Chain, into the show notes. So that way you can find out and learn more about Daisy Chain and be able to get in contact with Nathan. Brings us to an end of another episode. Hey, listeners, I encourage you to continue supporting this podcast so I can bring you more amazing content. You can do so by visiting my Patreon page, where you can connect with me more directly with several options. Till next time, take a leap and transform.